Act 1. The End of a Dream. The summer of 1969 was the hangover at the end of a decade-long party. The idealism of the summer of love was fading, replaced by the harsh realities of war and social unrest. But in the sun-drenched canyons of Los Angeles, the dream of Hollywood was still very much alive. It was a world of movie stars, music moguls, and endless possibilities. A place where fame and fortune seemed to be just one lucky break away. Nestled in the Benedict Canyon, at the end of a long, secluded driveway, was 10050 Cielo Drive. It was more than just a house. It was a symbol of that dream. The sprawling ranch-style home belonged to two of Hollywood's brightest stars. The acclaimed film director Roman Polanski and his wife, the beautiful and beloved actress Sharon Tate. She was a golden girl, a rising star. And at 8.5 months pregnant, she was on the cusp of a new, joyful chapter in her life. But on the morning of August 9th, 1969, that dream was shattered forever. The morning housekeeper, Winifred Chapman, arrived at the estate to a scene of unnatural silence. As she approached the house, she made a series of discoveries so horrific, they would seem torn from the pages of a macabre horror film. The illusion of safety in the Hollywood Hills was about to be irrevocably broken. Sprawled across the front lawn, and inside the house were the bodies of 5 people. The scene was one of utter chaos and brutality. The victims had been shot and stabbed multiple times in a frenzy of violence. And scrawled on the front door, in the blood of one of the victims, was a single cryptic word: pig. The victims were soon identified. Inside the house lay the bodies of 26-year-old Sharon Tate and her friend, the renowned celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring. Outside were Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, and her boyfriend, Wojciech Frykowski, an aspiring screenwriter and a friend of Polanski. The 5th victim, found in his car in the driveway, was 18-year-old Stephen Parent, who had been visiting the property's caretaker and was simply in the wrong place at the very wrong time. News of the massacre at Cielo Drive sent a tidal wave of panic through Los Angeles. This was not a robbery gone wrong. Nothing of value had been taken. This was not a crime of passion with a clear motive. This was something different, something random and terrifyingly savage. The rich and famous, who had believed themselves insulated from the world's dangers in their hilltop mansions, were suddenly gripped by fear. Gun sales skyrocketed. Hollywood stars hired bodyguards. The city that had once represented a golden dream was now paralyzed by a waking nightmare. And the terror was only just beginning. Act 2. The Prophet of Fear. As the city of Los Angeles reeled in shock and terror from the Cielo Drive massacre, the nightmare was far from over. The very next night, on August 10th, another scene of horrific violence was discovered across town. A wealthy supermarket executive, Tate-LaBianca, and his wife, Rosemary, were found dead in their Los Feliz home. They had been brutally stabbed to death. The crime scene bore the same chilling hallmarks as the first. The violence was extreme and seemingly random. And once again, the killers had left behind cryptic messages scrawled in their victims' blood. On the walls and a refrigerator door were the phrases "death to pigs" and "rise." On the refrigerator, the killer had also misspelled the title of a Beatles song, writing Helter Skelter. Initially, the Los Angeles Police Department, overwhelmed and under intense pressure, failed to connect the two crime scenes. They treated them as separate, unrelated incidents, possibly a drug deal gone wrong at the Tate residence and a home invasion at the LaBiancas. This lack of connection allowed the real perpetrators to remain hidden, while fear and paranoia in the city reached a fever pitch. Who was committing these savage, ritualistic murders? The answer lay far from the glitz of Hollywood, in the dusty, forgotten corners of Los Angeles County. The answer was a man who was not a typical killer, but a failed musician, a lifelong convict, and a self-proclaimed prophet. Charles Manson. Manson was a charismatic but deeply disturbed manipulator who had spent more than half his life in prisons and reformatories. Released from prison in 1967, he drifted into the heart of the San Francisco counterculture, using his guitar and a strange, rambling philosophy to attract a following. He was not a commanding physical presence, but he possessed an unnerving intensity and an uncanny ability to identify and exploit the psychological weaknesses of others. He gathered around him a group of mostly young men and women, disaffected runaways and drifters searching for meaning in a turbulent world. They became known simply as the family. Manson moved them to Spawn Ranch, a dilapidated old movie set on the outskirts of Los Angeles. There, in the isolated, crumbling facades of old westerns, he established himself as their undisputed leader and guru. Life at Spawn Ranch was a bizarre cocktail of communal living, constant LSD trips, and Manson's increasingly dark and apocalyptic teachings. He exerted absolute control over his followers, isolating them from their past lives and brainwashing them with a twisted philosophy pieced together from the Bible, Scientology, and lyrics from the Beatles' White Album. To his family, Charles Manson was not just a leader. He was a messiah, a reincarnation of Jesus Christ, and they were willing to do anything for him, including kill. Act 3. Helter Skelter. To understand why the Manson family committed such horrific acts, one must first understand the bizarre and apocalyptic philosophy that Charles Manson preached to his followers, a concept he called Helter Skelter. Manson was obsessed with the Beatles, particularly their 1968 self-titled release, known as the White Album. He listened to it obsessively, convinced that the band was speaking directly to him through their lyrics, delivering a coded prophecy of the end of the world. He believed the song Helter Skelter, with its chaotic lyrics about rising and falling, was a direct message about an impending, apocalyptic race war. According to Manson's prophecy, the black population of America would soon rise up in a violent revolt, slaughtering the white establishment in a wave of brutal murders. After this bloody chaos, he believed the victors would be unable to govern themselves. This is where Manson and his family would come in. He preached that they, the chosen ones, would hide out the war in a mythical bottomless pit in the desert. When the dust settled, they would emerge from their hiding place to take control and rule the new world, with Manson as its leader. But by the summer of 1969, Manson was growing impatient. The apocalyptic race war he had prophesied was not happening. He decided that he and his family needed to show Blackie how to do it. He believed that by committing a series of gruesome, shocking murders against wealthy, prominent white people and staging the crime scenes to look like they were the work of black revolutionaries, they could ignite the flames of Helter Skelter. The goal was to create fear and paranoia, to push society to the brink, and to trigger the race war he so desperately wanted. The Tate and LaBianca murders were not random acts of violence. They were calculated acts of political and psychological terror. The victims were chosen not for who they were as individuals, but for what they represented. The rich white establishment, or pigs, in Manson's terminology. The extreme brutality was intentional, designed to shock and terrify the public. The messages left in blood were a crucial part of the plan. The word pig, scrawled on Sharon Tate's door, was meant to be a calling card, a term used by radical groups at the time to refer to the establishment. The misspelled Helter Skelter at the LaBianca residence was a direct, if clumsy, reference to his apocalyptic vision. These were not the actions of a simple killer, but the orchestrated first strikes in a twisted holy war, designed by a deluded prophet and carried out by his brainwashed followers. Act 4. The Devil's Disciples. While Charles Manson was orchestrating his twisted apocalypse, the Los Angeles Police Department was floundering. For weeks, the investigation into the Tate-LaBianca murders was a chaotic mess of false leads and dead ends. The two cases were being handled by separate teams who failed to see the connections, and the prevailing theory for the Cielo Drive massacre remained a drug deal that had turned violent. The Real killers were hiding in plain sight, completely off the police's radar. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected direction, and it had nothing to do with the murder investigation itself. In October 1969, nearly 2 months after the killings, the police raided the family's new hideout at Barker Ranch in the desolate Death Valley. They arrested Charles Manson and 24 of his followers, but not for murder. The charges were for a series of car thefts and arson. It seemed like a minor bust, but while in custody for these lesser crimes, one of the family's most devout members, a young woman named Susan Atkins, made a fatal mistake. Locked up in a women's detention center, she began bragging to her cellmates. In horrifying detail, she recounted the night at the Tate residence, describing the victim's pleas for mercy and her own role in the murders. She chillingly told her cellmate, Virginia Graham, that they had done it to instill fear in the establishment. She felt no remorse. Horrified, Virginia Graham reported the confession to the authorities. This was the bombshell the police had been waiting for. Suddenly, the bizarre, motiveless murders had a suspect. A hippie cult living in the desert. Investigators quickly connected the dots. They compared the details of Atkins' confession about the Tate murders with the evidence from the LaBianca crime scene. The similar brutality, the use of knives, and the bloody, scrawled messages. The pieces finally fit. The wall of silence around the family began to crumble. With Susan Atkins' confession as leverage, prosecutors were able to convince another key member, Linda Kasabian, to turn state's witness in exchange for immunity. Kasabian had been present at the Tate murders, acting as the getaway driver, but she had not participated in the killings. Her testimony would be crucial. The police now had a clear picture of what happened. They were no longer hunting for a drug dealer or a random killer. They were building a case against a charismatic cult leader and his brainwashed disciples. The public was about to be introduced to the terrifying concept of the Manson family, and the trial that followed would be one of the most sensational and bizarre in American history. Act 5. The Trial and the Tainted Legacy. The trial of Charles Manson and his followers, which began in June 1970, was a spectacle of chaos and courtroom theater unlike anything America had ever seen. The proceedings quickly devolved into a circus, orchestrated by Manson himself to be his final, grand performance. He appeared in court with a bloody X carved into his forehead, a symbol, he claimed, of being crossed out of the establishment's world. His followers outside the courthouse, and later the female defendants beside him, copied the gesture, shaving their heads and branding themselves in solidarity. Manson would rant, rave, and make bizarre, messianic statements. At one point, he even tried to physically attack the judge. His co-defendants, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, would giggle, sing, and shout out during horrifying testimony, showing a complete and chilling lack of remorse. Despite the chaos, the prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi, meticulously built his case. His central argument was that even though Charles Manson had not physically killed any of the victims at the Tate or LaBianca residences, he was the mastermind, the directing mind, who had ordered and orchestrated the murders through his absolute psychological control over his followers. His Helter Skelter philosophy was presented as the motive for the crimes. After a trial that lasted nearly 10 months, the jury agreed. On January 25, 1971, Charles Manson and his co-defendants were found guilty of first-degree murder. They were all sentenced to death. However, just a year later, their sentences were automatically commuted to life in prison when the California Supreme Court temporarily abolished the death penalty. The Manson family murders left a deep and permanent scar on the American psyche. The case is often cited as the symbolic death of the 1960s. The peace and love idealism of the hippie movement was shattered, replaced by a dark paranoia. The crimes revealed a terrifying, nihilistic underbelly to the counterculture dream. The idea that a charismatic leader could turn ordinary young people into remorseless killers sent a wave of fear through families across the nation. Charles Manson was never released from prison. He died of natural causes in 2017, but his legacy as one of history's most infamous cult leaders endures. He remains a chilling icon of evil, a testament to the dark power of manipulation and the terrifying fragility of the human mind. The murders he orchestrated were not just the end of 7 lives. They were the end of an era's innocence. What do you think was the true source of Charles Manson's power over his followers? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more explorations into the darkest chapters of criminal history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Dark Cell Stories.